Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for the AI Sovereignty Who Do Your Agents Serve Tech Talk today. My name is Jan Schwöbel. I'm the Director of Customer Engineering for Private Cloud AI, and really want to talk to you a little bit about who do your agents work for. Before we get there, just a quick forward-looking statement, right? We'll be talking about some items that might still be roadmap items. So if you have questions at the end, please come and see me, and we can chat a bit about those. And then, of course, if you've attended any other sessions, we love your feedback. If you have the HP Discover app, look for the session number TT1754. Submit some feedback. We'll make sure that I get better, that our content gets better, and that we provide something that's valuable to you and everybody else. So with that being said, right, if you look at it the last couple of years, what has happened is organizations have moved to the cloud, and they have leveraged the cloud for AI, and the cloud has been great for prototyping and building out POCs. But what has changed and what becomes more difficult is when you think about how do I move into production, how do I handle governance and potentially sovereignty, and that's exactly where we think enterprise AI is coming home. It's coming back on premise. And that's not just myself or HP saying this or our marketing department, right? There's been real studies around it from actually earlier this year. I think the 78% of enterprises have been saying, hey, we already run enterprise AI and inferencing in-house today. An additional 67% of leaders across US and Canada have said, we will be moving some of our AI data, not all of it, but some, back on premises in the next 12 months. And we're also seeing that most organizations run somewhere around 7 different models, right? In prod, pre-prod, and in dev test. So they're always evaluating several other models. And what that tells us is it's not just about playing around anymore and testing. It's really around scaling this and how do I actually operationalize AI in the enterprise. And so when you think about operationalizing and doing that in the enterprise, there's a lot of different questions that come up. And one of those is, right, why do people actually run on-prem? I'm based out of Munich, Germany. If you're a multinational organization, you're familiar with GDPR and the EU AI Act. There's lots of regulations in Europe, of course. In the US, there's a lot more around like NIST frameworks and providing guidance. And it's not just all about regulation, why people would move on premises. It's also about, hey, I want to be in control of my data. I want to know where it sits. I want to understand where it flows. Because at the end of the day, AI touches your crown jewel, your IP, and your data. Right? And even if you don't expose your data, you have the prompts which have an intent in them, and they will keep proprietary information potentially. At least myself, I've used ChatGPT, I've used Claude Code and others, where I have submitted potentially my health information in, or I've asked it some details that I probably shouldn't necessarily share with a model. Same happens in the enterprise, same happens every day. Even if you don't have the prompt intent, and you don't think about the prompt intent necessarily, the output from the model can also tell what was the intent of the question behind it, right? And then, of course, we see token costs going up through the roof, right? I think many of you have probably read a recent article, I think it was on TechCrunch and many other publications, that a very large organization went through a large number of tokens, which was their whole budget for a year, within the first quarter, right? And this is happening more and more, and people are burning through their budgets faster and faster. So some of the first use cases we're seeing are not the crazy ones you hear out and like all the full-blown agentic workflows like OpenClaw or Hermes. What we see are the first workloads moving on premises or moving into production are usually internal chatbots and coding pilots, right? Just said, costs have gone up per token. People are looking, how can I do coding and how can I do chatbots on premise, because an easy use case to get into production and an easy one to get started with. And what we see there specifically is people rely oftentimes on open source models such as Meta, models from Alibaba like the Qwen 3 or Qwen 4 models, or Google models like the Gamma models, right? But what's been interesting is the first iteration of customers and people we spoke to was about what is the largest model I can possibly run in production to just get something going. So we have customers who run GLM 4.7, like a 300 billion parameter model, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need it for every single use case. What we're now seeing is kind of like the second wave of people that are looking at, hey, what's the smallest possible model I can use? Because people want to get greater GPU utilization. They want to ensure that the latency is good and that the first time to token is improved, especially if you have customer-facing applications. And so with that being said, that's exactly where some of our partners like NVIDIA come in, right? NVIDIA has NIMs, for example, for the Gamma model and the Llama model. If you're not familiar with NVIDIA NIMs, they use open source models, usually the most popular ones, and they optimize them where you usually get somewhere between 20 to 50% better performance than if you just download from Hugging Face and use the open source equivalent. They also look at security patches and so on. And I think the key takeaway here is really, it's no longer just experimentation. It's about moving production and doing that at scale with AI. And as we move into scale and move into production, things that come up again is, right, shadow AI. We've all lived through shadow IT, people spinning up their own virtual machines, their own cloud accounts, not fully orchestrated through a central IT team. Everybody's going to burn a lot more tokens, and we have to figure out how do we meter those. And if you're in a regulated environment, thinking about like how do I stay actually compliant. And so moving on premises allows you to regain governance through lifecycle management, making sure you have standardized models and pipelines, but also think about single sign-on, role-based access control, and how do I potentially have multi-tenant infrastructure for that. The other big shift that we've seen, and I hope most of you have experienced so far, is it's no longer just about I want to prompt and I want to get an answer, right? If you attended Antonio's keynote, if you attended Fidelma's keynote, it's all about agentic, and we're seeing more and more where our users actually want to see the AI act on certain things rather than just me prompting it and getting an answer. So for the last couple of years, we've all lived in the Copilot world, whether it's GitHub Copilot or any other products on that front, where the human initiated the agent or the AI. We're now moving to a world where agents are using the human in the loop. And one of those use cases that we have seen with one of our customers, it's one of many, but I would love to share, is an agentic coding framework, right, that they have used. So what they have done is they use a software defect solution, something like Jira or GitHub Issues or GitLab Issues. They tag that software issue, an agent comes in, picks it actually up, writes the code based off the description and the summary of the issue, creates an MR or pull request or merge request, depending on what software you use, commits it and sends it off to a human and says, hey, human, you go out and please review that, right? And that's just one of the use cases where now the human is in the loop rather than the human is being the one who is initiating and is just asking questions and it's getting an answer. And one of the things to think about as part of this is, right, as we let agents take actions, if we do action without chaos, it really turns into chaos. And we've seen this movie before, right? Those agents come from the same IP address. Those agents might be using the same API keys and the access tokens that you wouldn't do with humans, right? We always say, don't share your access keys, don't share your credentials. Everybody should have their own credentials. But one agent could be used by multiple people potentially. Right? And so what we need to get to is really around sovereignty over agents. And that is not just about regulation and compliance. It's very much so also about how do we verify and ensure that we can control what the agents are doing and understand how a certain action has happened. So something to ask ourselves is really, who do our agents really work for at the end of the day? Right? There's different answers for everybody, but are they acting on behalf of IT? Are they acting on behalf of SOC or sales? Operations or engineering, are they going to be shared, the agents? But then what do we do about the access keys, for example, that would be shared with a single agent, right? Where do we actually go with this, right? And that makes it becomes even harder now that the agents are moving into the line of business, right? You now have organizations and finance teams and IT teams who actually want to run those agents in their line of business to help them out. And we've seen, of course, a lot of the open source frameworks, right? Hermes, look at OpenClaw or NemoClaw now, that really come with a promise. Hey, we're going to build something that runs 24/7. It monitors, it thinks about it, and it also, at the end of the day, acts on top of it, right? And that promise has some obstacles in the enterprise, right? You have to think about, again, identity, security, right? How do we secure it and how do we govern it? How do we make sure that what I run here does not impact my production, for example, right? How can I make sure that the answer I got just now, my colleague asking the same question is getting the same answer and the same action is being taken, the same tools are being called, right? And so as we spin up more agents, the risk compounds, but so does also the cost, right? And it's a classic trade-off of speed of innovation versus how much control we want to have over the risk. And it gets even worse, right? Like, it goes to another level of complexity where we have to think about, hey, one agent can serve multiple users, but you also have agents that can spin up other agents. You have agents that can talk to other agents. They interact with each other. They might run in loops, right? For a long time, you might have heard in the industry token maxing. Now I see people writing online, hey, we're going to just be people who write loops, and our agents are going to loop through all day to review code or do certain tasks. It's all just going to burn tokens. How do we keep in charge of that, and how do we keep track of that moving down the line as we move those agents into productions? And at the same time, right, we saw the whole thing about Fable and other models that are very powerful on the cybersecurity side. The other thing to look at is this agent potentially a double agent? Do they work for you, or do they potentially work for somebody else and actually cause some harm in the organization? Those speed of attacks is dramatically increasing, not going to be at human speed anymore, but actually at agentic or at GPU speed. And what this gets me to is kind of like, what does an enterprise AI control plane look like today? And we at HP, we built something like this. I think you saw something similar today, potentially in Fidelma's keynote, with a lot more color to it and a lot more logos. But if you look at the highest level, you're going to have a stack that's not, just one component. It's really many different products being pieced together. On the very top, from inferencing for tooling like Airflow and Kubeflow for data pipelines, Open Web UI if you want to build a chatbot, for example, all the way down to observability, right? From HPE, we have OpsRamp, of course, Persis or Grafana for building out dashboards, getting understanding of who's consuming my tokens, how many tokens are they consuming. LightLM, which really helps you to be a model router to, for example, bridge the gap between the cloud and frontier labs with on-premises, building out budgets, getting understanding of how much money do we actually spend, all the way over to LangFuse, which really lets you trace every call to a model. How has the model thought about it? And then really get the explainability of what has happened with your AI stack. Then we go further down, right, to the model catalogs, right? You might be bringing NIMs, the NVIDIA ones. If you have our products, many of them come with the NVIDIA AI Enterprise license. You can also pull, of course, open source models. Or if you're one of the organizations who train foundational models or fine-tune models, of course you might have your own models as well and have those potentially in a model catalog like MLflow. And at the very bottom, what we've heard, I think, Fidelma kicking off early, right? Data is key to AI, and without data it doesn't work. So you might also have your object store, your data fabric, your SANS, your NAS, your NFS, and so on, where all the data lives in today. And both of those things today, the enterprise AI control plane is something that comes with HP Private Cloud AI, and we also have it, of course, in our AI factory offerings. But then if you look at what does it mean to look at, for agentic AI and how does this change? And you see there's a whole another level around like agent policies, right? If you have done anything with agents, there's usually like an identity file, a soul file. You have tools and MCPs, all the different tooling and the APIs you're going to let connect. You need some kind of governance around it. You have to have some kind of idea of how do I actually do this? What tools are allowed? Is it read-only? Is it read-write? Where do we go with that? Skills catalog, right? What kind of skills, what kind of behaviors should the agent provide? All the way to traditional IAM and IDP policies, but for agentic, right? We need something for the machine, not just for the human anymore. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we want to have agent workspace that are really isolated, almost kind of like virtual machines, to ensure one agent doesn't impact the other agents, right? Because they can, of course, share file system. They can write to disks. They can act. You also want to have dedicated inferencing as well as different LLM endpoints potentially to ensure that your agent in dev does not impact your other production end agent, for example, or if you have multiple agents in production, they don't cause harm to each other. And then at the very end, we, of course, have agent memory to make sure that we have the longest possible context lengths, that we don't have too many don't have to burn too many tokens. And some of that has come through with our Alletra X10000, with the KV cache, and some of the new things that we can be doing there as well. So with that being said, I think one of the things I would love for you to see, if you want to see how this looks in action and what we've built so far, I think taking a look at the booth at D613 over behind the AI factory, we can actually give you a demo of how we implemented NemoClaw in an enterprise setting, connected with Outlook, connected with Slack, connected with Teams, and what does a real workflow look like, and how can you do that secure and governed with identity and everything else around it. And with that being said, the last question I want to leave you with is, as you move agents into production, who do your agents really work for? That's going to be the question you have to be able to answer if you want to move agents into production. Couple of other sessions I would recommend, as well as demos, right? We have Bring AI to Life with the NemoClaw, that's the one at 613. We have the Sovereign AI with Private Cloud AI air-gapped, as well as compliant and secure Sovereign AI to take a look at as well. That said, thank you very much. I'll stop by I'll be over here real quick, take a couple of questions, and thank you for your time.